Robots. Will they become even more part of our daily lives before too long? And if so, what will it be like to work and live alongside these smart machines? Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle for PJTV, and here to discuss this with me in studio is Dave Swindle, assistant editor at PJ Media. And joining us from Tennessee is our blog father himself. From Instapundit, it's Glenn Reynolds. And from Texas, my trifecta co-host, Scott Ott. Guys, you know, we don't, it's not a big breakthrough on anybody's part to say that robots are here and have been here for a long time. Robots assemble cars, robots sweep the rug, robots do any number of things today in form of what we call just general robotics. But I think I can speak for everybody here when we're going to today try to limit this conversation to kind of this traditional idea of a robot as a self-contained humanoid type figure. Let's just kind of say that. So, Glenn, I don't see any reason why we should delay the inevitable spice. You're a robosexual yourself. You've come out as a you know, like Bender, or unlike Bender, I suppose I should say. You know, one of the things that is actually becoming somewhat common, especially in places like our friends in Japan, are the idea of using robots as a sex surrogate. So, if we're going to talk about living and working side by robots, we might as well just start there with the pay dirt and get into some of the stuff we saw in movies like AI. This is an interesting thought, isn't it, for our 21st century kind of demasculinized, don't want to meet anybody, I'd rather just send a text kind of world?
Well, you know, if you count a vibrator as a sex robot, then about half the women in America are having sex with robots already. And that actually doesn't seem to creep people out, and nobody's complained too loudly about competition or anything. So maybe it's no big deal. But I think that as the robots look more like people and less like a household appliance, somehow people will process it differently. I don't know, there was a Futurama routine, you know, don't date robots. And that may be a warning from our future. But I'm married to a cyborg, actually, so you know, no robosexual hate, please.
I've seen some of the latest humanoid creatures and robots from Japan. There are like basically inanimate sex dolls that are pretty realistic looking, but some of these moving robots that have features and blink and smile and stuff, they creep me out. We haven't gotten through the uncanny valley with these guys yet.
No, I actually kind of wonder if the first mass market, especially Japanese sex bots, probably won't look more like anime characters. And the reason is Japanese like those already anyway, and frankly, so do lots of Americans. And that gets you over the whole uncanny valley thing. They don't have to look quite human.
Mm-hmm. The uncanny valley is this idea that as animation, on-screen animation robots get more and more lifelike, they actually get more and more disturbing, and they kind of, as you get on the other side, then they get realistic enough to process again. Scotty, you're going to give us an interesting take on this, I have no doubt. But this idea of mechanical sexual aids goes back to the Iron Maiden on board, you know, the British Navy back in the 1700s. And so sort of a sexual surrogate is useful for people on very long sea voyages, or maybe for astronauts, or guys who work in the tech industry, you know, people without access to actual women. Do you have an opinion on this?
I was really hoping I didn't have an opinion on this.
I knew you would.
This is a show where we're supposed to express our opinions. You know, it just made me think, as Glenn was talking, that I think the number one requirement for this kind of activity is going to be a good pair of noise-canceling headphones, because you really do want to drown out the sound of the servo motors.
Oh my God.
I think that could really put a damper on the sense of romance that you might have. You know, I think when you're talking about robots serving as essentially sex slaves without the burden of human slavery, because it's just a machine, I think then you get to the question of, well, what in fact is sex? Is it just friction? Is it just something to tantalize the nerve endings? Or is there something deeper than that? And I think those robots can never be a replacement for the kind of sex that I would say that God intended, where we actually have love between two human beings.
Well, Dave, let's talk to you. You know, not a whole lot of people want to admit this, but in my opinion, looking back at the last 20, 30 years of tech development, it seems like graphics cards and computer processing power was driven by the game industry. That's really where the market was for faster and better looking graphics. And the internet was driven by porn. I mean, the high bandwidth internet in the early days before YouTube really hit was driven by this. That was the market. I know we don't want to be too tantalizing about this, but that's where the market forces work. What Scott was talking about is really interesting to me, is this idea about consciousness, because I saw this remarkable movie, Her, where the guy doesn't, it's not an actual physical robot, it is a consciousness embodied in an operating system, and he falls in love with this operating system. So the Turing test, right, is the idea that if you can have a conversation through a telephone or a keyboard or through some kind of physical barrier, and you cannot tell after a half an hour of conversation whether you're talking to a machine or a person, then that is in some level consciousness. Do you think that kind of consciousness is far away from being embedded in self-contained walking mechanisms?
Well, I think we need to set our definition of consciousness much higher than just, you can't really tell just by talking with them. Setting the definition of consciousness at just words on a page, basically. And that's our understanding of the technology now, and that's what the internet is, it's just words on the page. But I was really, I appreciated Scott's comments, and I think the word that needs to be thrown out here and the discussion that needs to be had is that they're sex slaves, but they're prostitutes, digital prostitution. And right now it's, we don't have that outside of Nevada. There aren't a whole lot of places where a man can go to get a prostitute very easily. But how would our society be when, a digital prostitution, digital brothel is just there, and you just go in and pick your robot, etc. Is that the future that we're looking at?
Well, now we're getting to the point of things, because the interesting thing about using this as a launching point for a robot discussion is this idea of emotional connection and intimacy, and also the idea that it is a mechanical device, as Glenn said, there are hundreds of millions of mechanical devices in use today. Where it becomes prostitution is where that creature has consciousness. It has some sort of, you disagree?
I disagree. I think that pimp prostitute sexuality, you don't even necessarily need real pimps and prostitutes to do it. The model of sexuality of a man just getting off and enjoying the pleasure of sexuality by himself, whether a man is doing it alone, watching the internet, or pays a prostitute to do it, or pays a robot to do it, that's one model of sexuality that has been exploding and is going to continue to explode, and it's going to be competing with the Judeo-Christian model of marriage, where it's balanced, where the man is not just focused on his pleasure, his thing, that sex is about transcending that the woman's experience is equally important. So I think as these sexual robots get more sophisticated and cheaper and more available to the masses, we are going to see more men, as Glenn's wife, Dr. Helen, has written about, more men on strike, more men dropping out, because it will be so much easier to just go and get your ideal prostitute wife that's a machine, instead of dealing with a real woman who has real issues and real needs. It's a lot harder to, Japan, in so many ways, is so much, I wouldn't say they're more technologically advanced than we are, but they are, without question, more technologically saturated than we are. They live much closer to this. And putting aside the mechanical aspects of it, you find more and more and more and more Japanese humans completely giving up on dating. You just see more and more of young Japanese that just saying, I'm not interested in dating. I don't want to date people. I don't want to have this human connection. I want my anime. I want my this. I want all these other things. So let's go back to you for a second, Glenn. We've got a hold of a survey here that says that by 2025, 1 in 3 jobs, 1 in 3, 33% of the jobs in the country will be handled by robots by 2025. So here's what I'd like to ask you, Glenn. A lot of people are a little worried about that sort of thing, but really, isn't it historically true, and doesn't it seem to be true in the future, that the jobs that are going to be taken over by robots are going to be the jobs that require the least humanity? With no disrespect whatsoever to people who work on an assembly line, it's actually liberating to get humans off of an assembly line doing this repetitive work. I have generations, 3 or 4 generations that were cotton carders in a textile mill in Lancashire. All they did was separate cotton 10 hours a day, 6 days a week for 30 years. I don't mind robots taking over that job. What kind of jobs do you think we're going to see disappearing to robotic workmen in the near future?
Well, one of the first places to go, and it's going to cost a lot of jobs, I think, is the introduction of self-driving technology. I mean, if you look at people who make money driving now, you've got taxi drivers and Uber drivers. You've got probably actually will be even hit even sooner, long-haul truck drivers. I mean, Mercedes has a concept self-driving truck now. that looks pretty cool. And those kind of jobs, I think, are visibly in danger now because they're readily replaced by machines. And while you can say, well, those are jobs people shouldn't do, most people would rather have a job than be unemployed. And for a lot of people, those are the kinds of jobs that they can do.
Let me ask you a quick follow-up on that. Certainly self-driving cars are within our means now technologically and will become more so every passing year. There are cars now that have automatic brake applications. If you're not paying attention, there's a little, I guess it's an acoustic sensor that determines, hey man, you're closing on this car too fast, applies the brakes for you. Speaking as a libertarian and a man with a solid law background, in this country, which used to be the home of the free, built on automobiles in my personal opinion, can you envision a world where you will not be allowed to drive your own car in the future because people make mistakes?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, it's certainly foreseeable to reach a point at which it would be considered negligent to operate a car yourself when the electronics could do a much better job. And people who want to actually experience driving a car will have to go to some special reserve or something where they don't endanger other people. You know, that's, I think that's very foreseeable. It's probably 30, 40 years away at most.
That special reserve where you're allowed to drive your own car is called the United States of America, and the day when I'm not allowed to drive my own car on my own roads is the day I'm leaving this country. I'm out of here. I'm going full Mad Max in the outback of Australia. Scott, I have a question for you. You may have seen some of these robots produced by Boston Robotics. They balance on their own, and they're kind of constantly hopping, and they've got four-legged ones that we're actually testing now in the military to deliver supplies to our troops, because if you shoot a hole in it, it doesn't matter. But because they're using balance, they have an extremely biological look to them. There's a scene where one guy kicks one of these things to knock it off balance, and the way it recovers makes a visceral reaction in me like, hey man, you can't kick that thing like that. Who do you think you are? So my question to you, Scott, is if there was a creature like that, a humanoid creature, and it was doing fundamentally mechanical things, take all the emotional stuff out, it's cooking your food, it's building a new extension on your house, it's washing your car, would you be comfortable with that?
Yeah, I don't know what comfortable means. I think I would absolutely be comfortable with any sort of technology that takes things, I don't want to call it drudgery, but takes tasks off of my plate, which I'm not great at. There's a lot of things I do right now, which I frankly do very poorly. And it would be great to have some sort of mechanical assistant who would take care of doing those parts of things so that I could hang on to that little shred, that infinitesimally small bit of skill that I actually have at doing something of value for humanity. So, you know, I don't mind that. I do think that people begin to get a sense of attachment to their belongings, obviously. I mean, just try slapping somebody's cell phone out of their hand sometime and see how they react. I remember when I was a little kid, I had a P-40 Warhawk gasoline-powered plane that it was, you actually flew it on strings. You held onto this little handle, and there were strings that went to the plane, and you just flew it around in circles until you got so dizzy you couldn't do it anymore. And I remember at one point, my brother wanted to come over and see what I was doing, and he ran into where I was standing, but the string hit my brother. And at that point, the little cockpit thing popped off, and the pilot actually ejected somehow, and the plane crashed. And I can remember my sorrow at the fact that the plane had crashed and I was thinking, wait a minute, it's plastic and it's metal. What am I thinking? So yeah, I think there's a little bit of that. It's maybe it just, hey, that's my stuff and I don't want to have to buy a new one. But I think a little bit of it, we kind of anthropomorphize it, you know? Well,
now I want to get to this point here because I think this is really the issue, basically looking forward morally. If you're okay with having a mechanized humanoid that builds your house extension or washes out your garage or washes your car, most of us are okay with that. But what if the intelligence that was required to do that also meant that it could sit down and educate your kids? And if you're not home, sit down, have a discussion with your kids, talk about history. How would you feel about that?
It educates my kids already. I mean, the technology that we have around us. I now have a Moto X Android phone, okay? I can talk to this thing. I can actually use a special phrase that just me and Moto X know between each other. And I can ask it to do things. It will read me text messages and emails that come in. And I can get any bit of information that is, in the known universe, and my children could do the same thing too. So to a very real extent, our children are now being taught about this. I guess, at what point do we say, oh, we're living side by side with robots? I would argue, as you suggested early on, we're already doing it.
Now we come to the point, Dave. Now we come to the point. If I can have a device, a mechanical device that I can interact with as if it's a person, but it's not a person, it's something I'm holding in my hand. And at the same time, if I can have a machine that has the same kind of biological reflective actions that make me empathize with it on a purely gut level emotion, like this is a creature. When we put that kind of conscious, or that kind of intellect anyway, that kind of information processing ability into a self-contained humanoid structure, I think the $64,000 question is, at what point does that stop becoming a machine and become, if not a person, a creature with consciousness? It is no longer moral to deploy into combat. It's no longer moral to expend and destroy. How do you define when this thing stops becoming a machine, which simply can be thrown away, and when does it become a creature? This is what the big science fiction issues are always about. How would you make that definition?
Well, I think we have to start with the technology that we already have and see it in the context of stuff that we don't even interpret as technology, that really domesticated animals and plants are a form of technology. And we're still grappling with the question of how do we treat our dogs? How do we treat our cats? They obviously have some degree of consciousness.
No question.
And I think as we develop with robots, it's going to go at that state too, where they're going to have a little bit of consciousness, but not to the degree of us. And then at one point they're going to get past us, and then it's just going to snowball. It's just going to go really fast because it's going to be intelligence building on intelligence, figuring out how to make itself smarter and smarter and smarter. That's what the singularity refers to, and that's what we don't know. We can't imagine how somebody smarter than us is going to be able to build themselves even smarter and smarter and smarter.
You're a singularitarian, so obviously you don't fear the singularity.
No.
Some people would say that once intelligences are more advanced than ours, then of course the reason it's called the singularity is it just accelerates beyond our ability. Faster machines are creating even faster machines, which are creating even faster machines. Why would they not take the position that we take now, namely, this machine is expendable, it's of limited intelligence, limited intellect, so therefore we're going to deploy it to make cars all day or send it into combat. What's to stop super mechanical intelligence looking at us the same way?
I think probably because we're going to be the ones that have been putting in the values into it. I mean, there are going to be evil robots because they're going to be made by evil people.
Thank God. If the future doesn't consist of evil robots, I don't want to live in the future.
Yeah.
I got to have something to aim my blaster at.
Yeah. So as much as there's going to be robot prostitutes and robot warmongers, I think there's also going to be, robot angels, robot priests, robot people that are going to try and push us to be better human beings.
Glenn, that's a great topic to close on. So much of this modern programming is, at least futuristic programming, is heuristically based, where you learn a lesson, and rather than having to teach a robot everything and enter a line of code for every single thing it has to cope with, that's just impossible. They're going to learn the way we do. We learn if something is glowing red, it's probably hot. If you touch it once, you learn it is hot. Don't touch anything that's glowing red again. That's heuristic programming. It's what the H in HAL stands for. Just your opinion, Glenn, maybe with your legal background, where do you draw the line for legal protections for mechanical consciousness? I don't mean specifically, I mean just in general terms.
Well, you have two things. One thing is, you only have to, with a robot, you only have to do that heuristic teaching once. You sort of do the equivalent of raising one robot child into an adult, and then you can just copy that over repeatedly to all the other robots that you produce. So you can mass produce it, whereas with people, bringing up children is invariably individualized. My take is a little bit like David's, which is that we should probably operate by analogies. A robot that is as conscious as a dog probably has sort of the rights that a dog has. We don't treat dogs just like property, like inanimate objects, but we don't treat them like people either. A robot that is as smart and conscious and self-aware as a person, in my mind, kind of pretty much is a person, at least ought to be treated as one. And I'll leave it to other people to ponder the question of whether a robot that is as self-aware as a person and as smart as a person has a soul.
That's the question I was just about to ask. To wrap up with you, Scott, I mean, obviously the great thing about this panel discussion, we have a lot of different backgrounds coming in here. Do you believe, I think I would probably guess the answer to your question, but do you believe that it's possible for mechanical intelligence to develop a soul, or is a soul something, is the soul that, in your opinion anyway, that immortal distinction between something that is disposable and something that is not?
The short answer is no, but I just, in Glenn's comments, saw the end game of all of this, because at the point where people begin to think that it's reprehensible for you to buy and sell robots as if they were chattel, the whole thing is over.
Yeah, yeah. And the problem, of course, is that there's no dividing line. We have humans and we have animals. There's a huge distinction between the highest animal consciousness and human consciousness, but robots are pretty much a continuous spectrum, and so is mechanical intelligence. There's no distinct dividing line between the two. That leaves us in a tough spot. I'll just wrap by saying one thing. I might have mentioned this before. I think one of the most remarkable ads I've ever seen in my life was an ad for IKEA, and you can probably find it on YouTube. It's an IKEA ad for a lamp. And basically what they do is they show this lamp in this lovely warm apartment, and this woman picks up, this is an older lamp, and she picks the lamp up and puts it in the garbage, walks it outstairs, leaves it on the curb. It starts to rain. It's freezing cold. They've got a shot of the lamp in the box. Up in the window, you see the woman put the new lamp on the table. It's warm inside. It's nice and warm. Outside in the rain is this old lamp, and you feel this tremendous sympathy for this lamp. The storytelling is so great. You just think, oh, oh. And then the guy from IKEA walks into the frame and he looks at you and he goes, what? What? It's a piece of plastic. The new lamp is much better. And you just kind of go, oh, that's what interests me. We have built into our biology a great many behavioral restrictions and inhibitions and sympathies to treat things as if they're alive, and where that line is going to come down with mechanical creatures is going to be one of the great challenges of the years ahead of us. But I think that's going to do it for this topic today. Join us next time when we'll discuss the amazing medical advances we've made in the last 20 years and what the future holds for us there. Should we start growing replacement organs for ourselves, or should we do what I do, which is just go and harvest them from third world children? What about genetically engineering our children? We'll dive into that next time. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again.